Can you guys hear me okay? Or give me a thumbs up in the back there if you can hear me. Everybody good? Great. I've got another mic on me, so.
Please come and use this mic if you have questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Shepherd states questions and answers session. So thank you.
So what we're going to do tonight, we've got a short presentation. I'm going to give you an overview of the planning process and what's in the comprehensive plan so that when you go look at that draft online, you know what you're looking for. We're going to do that first. We'll have a little bit of a Q&A time if anybody wants to ask questions with the whole group, we can do that. And then what we've got is we actually have 8 tables with maps on them. What we're going to ask you to do before you leave tonight is to at least find the table that has the area that you live in. And take a note card and write down a couple of things that you would like to see happen in your neighborhood. So if you have concerns of things like maybe it's a stop sign that is needed, or a crosswalk that needs to be striped, or trees that need to be planted, anything like that at a smaller local neighborhood scale, we want to capture that tonight. And then of course, any big things that you have that you would like us to be aware of. This is really the last opportunity that you all, the community, have to provide some input into the plan. But at this point, we're focused mostly on implementation. So what are some of the actions that can be taken after the plan to implement the ideas that are in here? So before I get started, I just want to introduce a couple of other folks. I've got Karina Castillo back there in the back from our team. And then there's Wallace Mesher and Edwin from the city as well. So the four of us will be kind of mingling around these tables. I see Winston as well. So my team, and then also a couple from staff, will be mingling around the tables to answer some questions from you all at the end as well. And then also, once you do your table feedback for us, we've also got some of the bigger maps up here if you want to take a look at those as well. So let me go ahead and jump right in. So why is a comprehensive plan? I've been told I have to stay in a certain spot. Why does comp plan matter? These are 3 things that came up very early on in our engagement process. They're things that are not unique to Killeen. We hear these in a lot of the places that we're working. The first one is a funding gap. There's a lot of wants and needs in the community, and there's limited resources that the city has to address those needs. The second is a lack of alignment between the various plans and policies within a city. And then the third is this growing culture of apathy. For some folks, that can become frustration. But we see this more and more that, as folks get busy, we have busy schedules, we have a lot going on. And it just seems to be harder and harder for folks to engage with their community, to get involved in their community. I would say overall, we sense that, portions of the community in Killeen, but we also saw the other extreme here in Killeen. You guys have some folks that are very, very engaged as well. And there's a lot of folks that are right under the surface of, they're maybe not as engaged right now as they would like to be, but if you can talk with them about the right thing, whether it's their neighborhood or an issue they're concerned about, there's a lot of folks in Killeen that really care about Killeen and want to make it better. Why does it matter? Trade-offs. You cannot have all 3 of these in a community. It's very hard to have all 3 of these. Raise your hand if you want to have stable, predictable services, public services. Most folks, I guess the shy ones aren't raising their hands, but most folks say, I want stable, reliable city services. Raise your hand if you want low taxes. Okay. The guy's standing up. He's not just raising his hand, he's standing up. Raise your hand if you prefer lower density, so more spread out development, larger lots, more spread out development. Okay. You can't have all 3 of those. So with different developments in a city, there's trade-offs. Some areas we're going to have more density. Some areas are going to cost more to live in. Usually that's in the form of the cost of the house. Sometimes you get some street fees or neighborhood fees that are associated with different neighborhood designs. And then sometimes services are actually adjusted to fit where you're living as well. This is important to understand too when we get into a comprehensive plan. You have to understand how the city got to where they are. And this is a really critical factor for how Killeen especially has come to where you are today. This square is the original part of Killeen. That was pre-1960 development. What you see is a small, compact development. That's your old kind of your downtown, the older neighborhoods. And then you see all of the development that has happened around Killeen in the last basically 60 years. So between 1960 and 2020, your service area expanded by over 10 times. So that means more roads, that means more police, more fire, water towers, pump stations, parks, everything that goes with it. That service area has expanded over 10 times, but your population has only grown by 6 times. So what that means is you have more stuff that has to be provided and taken care of, and less people or a higher cost per person or a higher cost per household to pay for that stuff. Does that make sense? And so you've been on this trend of adding more development, adding more service area, and that cost obligation is increasing per homeowner, per household. This is a big reason why. This is kind of the big whammy in pretty much every city that we talk to and work with, and it's street costs. When a development comes in, the developer will build those streets and that infrastructure for the city. The city is on the hook to maintain that infrastructure for forever. And when I say city, it's taxpayers, right? A street will typically last anywhere from 20 to 40, maybe 50 years, depending on how well it was built and what material was used. But we did an exercise at the start of this process and just said, if Killeen were to rebuild all of the streets that you have right now, what would it cost? It was over $818 million is what Killeen needs to rebuild, not just surface, but rebuild those streets when they get to the end of their life. That comes out to over a 20-year lifespan of over $40 million a year. If you want to say it's over a 40-year life cycle, that would be $20 million a year. And so there's a deficit if you just look at the street budget, the general fund. I think we used 2021 when we did this, but there's a deficit there of almost $35 million a year in street costs. That's if you were to replace all of the infrastructure. Now, of course, we're not replacing all of the streets right now today. We're going to do that over time. That's what the chart on the right shows is you've got a small amount of that money, or a small amount of those streets that are in serious or failed condition that need to be fixed right now. The large majority of that is in good condition and isn't going to have to be replaced until 2035 or 2040, maybe even further out from that, depending on what kind of preventative maintenance stuff Public Works is able to do to extend those streets. But the point here is you have a lot of streets in Killeen that have to be maintained and ultimately rebuilt. And where is that money going to come from? I'll usually get a question, what about bond elections? Yes, bond elections can help. They do a few of these projects, but usually when we study these, we see you put money into a bond election and you address a few, but then the next time you do a capital improvement program, your list of liabilities is actually even longer because you're building new development on top of that. So quantifying the resource gap, one of the things that we did was a pretty detailed, what we call a land use fiscal analysis. And we looked at the property tax production, basically, of your development pattern. We looked at the value of a property, divided it by the size of the property, and you get a value per acre number, or a tax revenue per acre number if you take the actual levy property that they pay. You'll see a bunch of that unpacked in the document, detailed out more, but here's the numbers y'all need to know, and these are targets that staff and council need to know going forward. Here's where you're at right now. You're getting about $14.40 per acre citywide in terms of property tax revenue, right? You need, just to pay for general fund services and your existing streets, you need to be at about $33.50 an acre citywide to break even. And if you really want to get to a place that you're financially sustainable, that you have the money to take on additional general funds, so additional parks, additional libraries, police, fire, whatever those additional general fund services might be, You're talking in the neighborhood of $5,000 per acre. So if you look at the tax revenue, the property tax revenue that the city of Killeen gets, and you divide it by the overall city limit area, that's the target you need to be working towards. That's a big gap to make up, right? And so the numbers at the bottom, you've got 54% of the land area in the city is not covering that number. So 54% of the land in the city, 54% of the land in the city is making higher than the 1440. 33% of the land in the city is making the 3350, and then only 17% of the city's area is covering that 5,000 per acre target. Louis, yes.
I have a question. Does that include like government, nonprofits, any tax exempt entities?
Yeah, it's the entire city limits, the developable footprint. So floodplain, that is taken out, but if it's any land that could have tax generating development on it, it's included in that number. Yes, sir.
I have one. It might not be very intelligent question, but has it been that a city ever contracted its city limits to reduce its responsibility?
It's a great question, and the answer is more are starting to do that. This really kind of goes in the face of our approach to development since World War II of grow. We think growth is good. If we're growing, we're adding revenue, and that's good. But it's the cost side that we haven't thought about. I'm an engineer, civil engineer by degree, and the reason that I personally wanted to get into more planning is because I saw communities all over this country that did not have enough money to fix the stuff that we had already built. But my fellow engineers were out there saying, build more. So you want to build more, but you got to do it in a more fiscally and resource conscious and affordable way. But yes, some places that are so far that just can't catch up. Memphis, Tennessee is a really good one I love to point to. Memphis did a comp plan a few years ago, and they are reducing the size of their city limits to align with the resources that they have. So the people that are in the city limits, that are left in the city limits, they're trying to improve the quality of life and the public service to those folks. Detroit is another obvious one, but that is one of the strategies that's available. So these are three options when we talk about the resource gap and how does cities close it. There's really three general options. The first one, raise taxes or fees, not a very popular option. The second one is reduce services. So this means, and this is basically what's happening now, when we look at the list of neighborhoods and we look at all of the streets that we have to take care of, all of the parks that we have to maintain, a city, if you have a finite budget, you can only do so much with that budget, right? So as cities, we're making choices on what we take care of, and anything that we don't address is being deferred to a future year. At some point, that can work in the short term, but at some point that catches up with you, right? The third one is what this whole plan is about, is how do we develop more responsibly? How do we align Killeen's growth in a way that matches what the residents and the citizens of Killeen are willing and able to pay for now and in the future, right? You don't want to get to a point where all of a sudden council 5 or 10 years from now comes to the community and says, we've got to double your tax rate, and there really is no choice. That would not be a popular place to be in. Cities have been in that, and that's kind of where the reduce the footprint comes in. So this whole plan from the very beginning has been about educating about that gap, how we got that gap to begin with, and now we're moving towards how do we close the gap, and that's what the rest of the plan talks about. There's three parts of the plan when you look at it. The first is the introduction. This has a bunch of information about Killeen, the population, who lives here, average income, all of those kind of good things. Also explains a little more of the development pattern and the fiscal stuff that I was just talking about. The second part of the plan is organizational components. There's 4 of them. This is kind of the technical part of the plan that really staff is going to use a little bit more. And then the third part is implementation of what are things, how can we do projects, policies, programs to help us achieve the vision and the goals that we have in the plan. This is at the very end of the introduction chapter. This is the identity statement on the left and 6 big ideas on the right that came out of a lot of input from the community. Actually, can I pause for a second? If you were a member of our Comp Plan Advisory Committee, our CPAC, do you mind raising your hand real quick? I want folks to see. So these folks, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 of you in here. These folks put a lot of time in over the last 18 months to come to meetings, to give us input. A few of them went on all of the workshops that we did in different neighborhoods. We got a lot of really, really great input. It's always a struggle sometimes at the end of these when we present the plan of what we heard for the overall community and what we've heard from a few individuals and trying to kind of merge those together. But it's been a pleasure to work with y'all CPAC, especially the 4 that I see in here. You guys are good folks, and we've had some good, frank, honest conversations, which I really appreciate. But you all, the rest of Killeen really owes them a debt of gratitude, really, because it's been a lot of work to get us here. But identity statement, there's a couple of parts that make this up. The first one is values. What are things that the community told us they value? Diversity, safety, family, and service. The second part that you see in the middle is what are things about the community that you want to preserve or protect? What are things that are unique to the community? Your citizens, the military, institutional partners, so the colleges, the base, et cetera. You have a lot of good philanthropic partners. They're all kind of in this group. And then this is the aspirational part, the vision, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. And this is really, really important as well, but bring all of us together to make Killeen incrementally better for everyone every day. We did a lot of wordsmithing here, and we talked about order of words, but this is really important because everyone in Killeen is important. Doing it incrementally. How can we make things incrementally better? Not trying to turn Killeen into a completely different city overnight. How can we take where we are and make us a little bit better every day? And then everyone every day. The big ideas on the right here, there's 6 of them. There was a survey on the city's website just recently that came out. These are put in the order of the responses that we got back. The first one was grow in a fiscally responsible way. Second is a positive community culture. The third is a local business ecosystem, a self-sustaining local business ecosystem, so growing local businesses. The fourth is an improved transportation network. You'll see when you look at the mobility chapter, it's really about a safe and efficient mobility system for everyone. So right now, Killeen is all about the car and getting everywhere by car. We want to make it safer and more efficient for folks to get around in some other ways as well. Number 5, neighborhoods are more than subdivisions. This was Mr. Cagle's thing right up front, the city manager. We need neighborhoods, not subdivisions. If you look at the aerial maps of Killeen right now, you see a lot of subdivisions. You don't see a lot of neighborhoods, right? And I'll talk more about what that means here in a minute. And then the last one is a vibrant downtown. The downtown is really, really important. We've had all kinds of mixed thoughts on where downtown fits in things, but downtown, I will tell you, it's very important to the fiscal health of the community overall, but it's also the identity. It's the heartbeat of the cultural heartbeat of a city is your downtown. And one of our team members, one of the things they said when we came in for our first workshops was, there's no there. There's no there in Killeen. Like if I were to ask you all, if you have folks or visitors come in town, where do you take them?
Austin.
Right? So you desperately need somewhere that is uniquely and authentically Killeen. And you have a really, really great opportunity that I'll talk a little bit more when I get to the downtown slides. So these, yes, sir.
I have one more question that I'm really curious about as far as the funding gap that you're referring to that cities have to meet. I think Texas as a whole, you see it as like this is probably once in a generation that we've seen this. The home prices increasing so much within a year. Are you seeing other cities, counties, whatever, keeping the tax rates the same, lowering them? Because I mean that's a big chunk of money that would be coming in if they keep it at the same rate with the higher values.
That's a very loaded question, but I will say what's happening. I've got to fly. What's happening? Some of you might groan when I say this, but Texas today is very similar to California about 30 years ago, right? And so we have built a whole lot of development in our communities. Not just Killeen, everywhere in Texas, we built a lot of development at a very attractive price point, and you combine that with some of the different incentives and housing incentives and economic incentives that have happened over the years, and you get a lot of people in a home for a very affordable price, right? But what happens as our communities age, and especially in Texas, Texas is really the last part of the country that's starting to get to a mature part of our growth phase, right? We were the last part of the country to really go in on the suburban development pattern. California did it first because they didn't need air conditioning. We need air conditioning. We need air conditioning, I'll just say that. But as those costs to serve it come in and more cities start to understand, oh, taking care of these parks costs money, police and fire costs money, you start to see cities say, we have to do more. And so they push on developers a little bit, and then the developers say, well, we got to bump the home values to take care of those costs. So that's part of what's going on. Construction costs are going up, which is part of what's going on. All of this is I think these next sessions in Austin are going to be very interesting because property tax in Texas is the primary revenue source for our cities. We can talk about offsetting that with sales tax and other revenue sources, which that's always what we hear is, well, let's go make it rain on the economic development side and we'll get a bunch of sales tax. There's a limit to how much that can do, and that sales tax money is supposed to go to other things. It's not supposed to go to basic services. Your development should create enough in property tax to pay for those things. So it's going to be really interesting to see how different cities address this in terms of the tax rate. But historically, what they do is when we grow, we get additional property, new properties, new homes that are built. That gives us new property tax revenue, and then we lower the tax rate because we have that additional revenue in there. But we're not quantifying those long-term, infrastructure liabilities. So, a lot of what we do, whether it's strategic planning conversations, budget conversations, or plans like this, is know what your gap is, know what your different options are to close it. You have to generate more property tax revenue, either holding the tax rate, maybe lowering it a little bit. But there's also a way with your development pattern of building different shapes and sizes of development that you can get more property tax revenue out of your development without having to raise the tax rate. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. I think you're going to need to see, there's going to be a lot of people that are in single-family homes today that probably will not be able to afford that in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And a big question that I challenge communities with is, where are those people going to go? Do you have the kind of housing and neighborhoods in your community for those folks, whether it's a retired baby boomer, whether it's a widow that just lost her husband and doesn't have the revenue to stay in the home that she is, whether it's the young professionals that are coming in that they grew up in a suburban community, they don't want anything to do with suburbs anymore, right? So when we talk about housing for everyone that you'll see in a minute, that part of that is price point, part of it is just lifestyle options, but a lot of it gets back to a fiscally productive, more financially productive development pattern to close that gap without raising the tax rate. Let me keep on going here. 4 components here: land use and growth management. This, as I mentioned, this talks about where we're going to grow, when we're going to grow. Neighborhoods gets into housing, different types of housing, different types of neighborhood. Mobility, connectivity is how people are going to get around, and then downtown was the fourth chapter. So I'm going to go through these real quickly. We've got some of these maps up here if you want to look at them more later. They're also in the planning document and explained in a lot more detail. But future land use map is the first one. This is what we're going to build and where we're going to build it. We've made a shift here from kind of conventional land use types of single-family residential or rural estate or regional commercial that you might be used to seeing. And some of these have evolved, especially the residential ones, to rural estate, residential mix, traditional neighborhood, and urban village. I got urban village in here twice. But the idea is there's more of an interest in mixing uses, mixing housing types, mixing some of your commercials so that you can have 3 or 4 generations of a family all living close together. You can walk down to a corner store, those kind of things at the right scale. And then when we look citywide in Killeen, making sure those different options. So if someone wants a typical suburban single-family neighborhood that's just nothing but single-family residential and nothing around it, and they're going to have to drive pretty much everywhere, you have that, right? If someone wants a more walkable neighborhood that maybe has some duplexes mixed in with single-family, that has some neighborhood commercial within walking distance, you're going to have that. That is the fastest growing neighborhood type in the whole country, really. But especially in Texas, we built so much suburban stuff, suburban single family, we don't have near enough of the other. One important thing with this and with the growth sectors that's next is, and let me just introduce growth sectors real quick. This is when, where, and how to build. So the land use is what we're gonna build and where. This gets into more when we're gonna build it and how to build it. And we've focused intentionally a lot up. I gotta go slow. But up here in North Killeen, that's the oldest infrastructure. There's a lot of vacant lots up there. There's a lot of opportunity to build some infill housing or some different types of housing to raise your tax base without adding any additional infrastructure or service costs, right? So there's different levels here from infill enhanced that's right around downtown. Intended growth is a lot of places that are basically have development plans that have come in already. That the city knows about. Neighborhood infill is existing neighborhoods and where can we go in and just fill in a vacant lot here or there, or maybe add some smaller commercial over time. Controlled growth and limited growth are the big ones. These two, anything that's in controlled growth or limited growth is going to undergo a much more detailed staff review for context, right? What is on the ground right now? And this is something that Heather, Ms. McNeely and I have talked about of just, what controlled growth means is you're going to see growth happening around you. But what does it look like, right? And that's where there's a lot of leeway and a lot of just leeway given to staff to say what's on the ground right now and what kind of development would fit the context of here. So you're not coming in right next to an existing neighborhood and building, a 5-story apartment building right next to a residential neighborhood. So there's a lot more flexibility here as opposed to the old way that's very much more rigid. When we get to neighborhoods, we talked about diversifying housing price points and options. Quality and affordability are not and do not have to be mutually exclusive. You can get a very high quality residential unit that could be 500 square foot. You could get a very high quality unit that's cheaper on the spectrum. What you don't want to get is some bigger development that is lower quality, that costs more to serve, takes up more land, but isn't generating as much of the tax revenue to the city. So there's this whole spectrum of things that can be built. We have to build that whole spectrum, but we have to build all of them better, right? We have to build better quality in Killeen.
So are there attrition rates due to foreclosure estimated into all of that?
Into all of what?
To the projections, because some of the neighborhoods are getting foreclosure homes and things like that, like downtown area on the other side next to Fort Hood.
Yeah.
A lot of that neighborhood is a lot of foreclosure homes. So I was just wondering, is any of that a factor in any of this planning right here?
Generally, we looked at things, is the neighborhood growing and adding, or, is there more of a decline of people moving out? But a lot of you'll see towards the end of this infill or incremental development, there's a lot of opportunities for, properties like that to go in and put reinvestment back into them. That, again, the streets there, the neighborhoods, the services there, but how do you take care of those? But that's code enforcement and taking care of existing neighborhoods is part of the equation
So it is part, that's what I was looking, that it is part of the equation.
Yeah. Another thing in neighborhoods that we talk about in the plan is this idea of complete neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, going from everything in the city being a 15 to 20 minute drive to trying to get more things to a 15-minute walk. Not everywhere, but in more of the neighborhoods. This is part of that neighborhood, not subdivision. So at a citywide scale, you're looking at larger things. You've got some rural neighborhoods out on the edge. You've got obviously your city services. When you get into the development zone scale, that's more of your fire stations, some of your schools, maybe your high school, your middle schools get into that category. And then when you get into the neighborhood scale in the center, that's a lot of your homes. That's more of your parks. That's where you want to have a lot better, bike and walk connectivity between things inside the neighborhood. We also, at the end of the neighborhood chapter, we talk about incremental development. Those of you who have been along for this whole process, we brought Monty Anderson in early on, and then again about halfway through for the downtown workshop that we did to show a lot of Monty's work. And this is just, it's not the only way to do it, but it's an alternative to the typical approach to development, which is we're going to build we're going to knock down 100 acres or 50 acres, and we're going to build it all at once. Incremental development does things one building at a time. This is actually a shot from Midtown in Midlothian, just southwest of Dallas. And Monty built this development that you see was built over about 15 years, one building at a time. He started with this one. There was a donut shop, and in the back there was an apartment. This family lived in the apartment for about 8 months while they got this going. Once they did that, they were able to pay off the mortgage on this whole thing. They moved to they moved out, they actually moved to a bigger home, and then also bought a second building. So this one they got in to start to kind of cultivate their family wealth, where they lived in a small space, got the business going, and then have grown from there. This one got added next, then there was this one, and then the market started to come here, and then they got the Fuzzy's Tacos, and now these are actually a couple of retail commercial units, office units on the bottom, and some residential units up above. So he started in this area where there was very little demand and built just a small donut and coffee shop where the folks that lived around here could come get donuts, get coffee with their kids, walk to it, and it grew over time. You can also see the mix of housing. He's built a really diverse mix of housing in this neighborhood as well. And when you do something well, the values go up. So he was building homes at the start of this process for about $150,000, and those homes are now $400,000 and up. Cultivating neighborhoods with locals. One of the exercises we're going to ask you all to do is tell us what are some things in your neighborhood that can be done. What are some things that you would like to contribute in your neighborhood to make things a little bit better? There's a lot in the plan as well that talks about this idea of how can we cultivate and grow businesses locally with the folks that are here. You can do market studies. You can try to attract a lot of retail groups to Killeen. That'll work in some markets, but what you really need to do is be growing your own. You have opportunities in North Killeen and downtown to grow a lot of small businesses. You also have some opportunities at a bigger scale to grow some cybersecurity and some other bigger things with partnerships with the EDC and the Chamber and the colleges in Fort Hood. So there's always talk on economic development about the big stuff. Everybody wants to throw out, I want a Chick-fil-A or whatever. But what you have a huge opportunity in Killeen to do is to cultivate your own local businesses. And think about this as a way to, you look at Austin, you look at the grit and kind of what's going on in Austin, you look at how unaffordable things have gotten there. What I think Killeen, the opportunity for Killeen is you're not going to be like a Temple or a Harker Heights next door, but you can be a very attractive and kind of gritty version of yourself. That's just a great opportunity for those young professionals coming in, the people that want to start businesses. You have a ton of places, vacant lots and vacant buildings to make that happen. On mobility, talking about aligning transportation with values. So part of the value system is we want to be able to drive places quickly. But other parts of the value system are we want to be safe, both when we're driving, but also when we're not in a car. And we also want to have options. So looking at ways that we can go to a more diverse mobility network where inside our neighborhoods we've got more narrower streets, more bike trails, walkability to it. And then as you get to, out to more of the regional, the roadways that are connecting you throughout the city, more of your arterials or your true thoroughfares, those are more prioritized for the car. What you have right now, what a lot of places have right now is what Chuck Marone, a guy from Strongtowns several years ago, coined this term strode, which is the futon of transportation, right? It tries to be a street, which is a place for human interaction, a place for growing value, and it tries to be a road, which is a place to have a high-speed connection between two places. Just like a futon tries to be a couch and it tries to be a bed, but it doesn't do either one very well, right? A strode tries to do both of those. So if you think about a 4 or 5 lane roadway that's got big box parking lots, fast food restaurants on both sides, traffic signals, sidewalks right along the pavement that nobody ever walks on, that's kind of your classic strode. So you can't drive quickly through those areas, and people can't walk or bike very safely or effectively on those as well. So some of the plan has been looking at how can we make more of these into streets, especially in our local neighborhoods. You guys have some of the widest residential streets I've ever seen. But narrower streets are safer, and then how can we make the roads more effective at moving cars? Looking at right sizing through what we call tactical improvements. Before you go out and spend a bunch of money on expensive road reconstruction, there's a lot of things you can go do with the community, with staff, to try things out. Drop a lane down, see what happens. Everybody says, oh, if you drop a lane, traffic's gonna be terrible. Most of the time when we go out and do things like that, it doesn't pan out. Sometimes it does. But these kind of things give you an opportunity to work with neighbors, work with staff, go out and try things, paint a bike lane, do some parklets maybe in downtown to do some pop-up spaces. They're very low cost. You experiment, you get activity going before you go spend the big money to make them more permanent. I mentioned downtown earlier and how important it is. Downtown's got to be the hub for cultivating fiscal health for the city, so making the city more financially resilient, but also cultivating local wealth for residents and businesses. The strengthen the tax base and fiscal health, diversifying housing, jobs, and entertainment options, defining cultivate that local identity and culture that we're talking about. And then the fourth one is building that local wealth through owner-occupied projects. We talk more about this in the plan. This gentleman here was asking me before about downtown. We did have a 3-day workshop where we focused mostly on downtown. These are the things that we heard about downtown, and this is in the plan in more detail. But security, better security, wayfinding, lighting, et cetera, is needed in downtown. There's no supermarket on the north side. We heard that loud and clear from folks in downtown and North Killeen residents. Find ways to help those experiencing homelessness. We've had some conversations on that. That gets a little bit beyond the scope of this plan, but it's something that was there. It was there consistently through our discussions, and we've had some conversations about some opportunities there. Better healthcare options was interesting. Just closer access to doctors, to medicine for the folks that live up there. And then number 5 is the lack of family-oriented business or activities in downtown, which the city has already started to do with some of the recent monthly programming down there. A couple of sites in particular that we looked at as opportunities for some incremental activation. One was the old HEB on the right. You see DeSoto Marketplace, which is another one of Monty's projects. Took an old Ace Hardware store, converted that into a business incubator inside. So created a bunch of small spaces, did like a Shark Tank to take ideas from the community. That place has been 100% leased since he opened it. He's had some places fail and some new ones come in, but even through COVID, everybody was paying their rent. He did that tactically. He took the parking lot. It looked very similar to this site, but big box and then big parking lot. He cut right down the middle of it. He cut right in the middle of the parking lot. You can kind of see it over here. He cut right through the middle. He put decomposed granite down, and he put food trucks on both sides of that. So it created a corridor from the main street straight into the building. Did food trucks at first, created some events and some activities there. And now he's actually around the outside. We're actually helping him do this right now, but he's doing some micro apartments around the outside of that site that's specifically for some homeless folks that were hanging around that site, around that neighborhood. The second one is a temporary festival park behind the chamber building down by the railroad. There's a site down there that the city owns. It's an opportunity to kind of do what we call a pop-up park. This is something there's been a lot of interest in as well, about getting something in next year's budget to do something just to create another space downtown to start to have events and things down there. There's also a big idea, which is the Veterans Park, where the tank and the helicopter are, to do a bigger kind of planned park and public space there. The same idea that I talked about with the mobility, there's opportunities to do this in neighborhoods and downtown as well. A lot of just tactical, cheap, low-cost things to activate spaces, give people places and reasons to get together. Ultimately, all this comes together to cultivate prosperity. We're trying to make Killeen a prosperous place for everybody. How do we improve your quality of life at a cost that you can afford? Fiscally sustainable development, the self-sustaining local economy and workforce, the culture of trust and collaboration, the human scale neighborhoods. And then this plan is the start of aligning codes and policies and budgets around all of these ideas to make things better incrementally with the resources that you have. The path forward, here's the timeline. We're working mostly on the implementation, the very back part of the plan at this point. We got some staff comments in that we've incorporated most of those. If you look at the draft that's online right now, most of those comments are in there. There's some page numbering and page references that need to be cleaned up for the final draft. But if you look at the plan that's online today, it's pretty close to final, except for the implementation matrix in the very back that we're waiting to incorporate some of what we hear tonight. We've got a couple meetings next week where the CPAC and then the plan zoning will recommend the plan for adoption. CPAC's tomorrow night. And then the P&Z is August 1st. And then August 5th is the final version of the plan. So if there's anything remaining from CPAC, anything that remains from P&Z, we get that incorporated. August 5th is the final document in council packets, and then council will have a workshop with them on August 16th, and then vote to adopt it August 23rd. So with that, this is the last part where we're going to do the breakouts. I'll go ahead and explain this for you all that want to move around, find your table, and then we can jump into, if anybody has questions for me, we can go ahead and take those. And then my goal is to just try to get input from folks and then get you out of here and back on to what you're doing. So real quick, the way the exercise will work, there's 8 tables, I think. Where are you guys? 5. So the very back right is development zone 1, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll keep this map up so you can kind of see where each of these is. If you're having trouble locating kind of where you're at, let one of us know. We can get you directed. But start at the table where you live, and then if you want to go to other ones, you're more than happy to do that. The more input we get, the better. Take one of the index cards, the big ones. We also have some extra small ones there in the back. But put the number of your development zone on the card, and write anything you want to tell us about that zone. If anything that's missing, anything you would like to see. And then especially if you're interested, one of the things that's going to come after this plan is more neighborhood level planning and implementation projects. So we're looking to find what are some small things that can be done in these neighborhoods. How can staff and the residents and the community and philanthropic partners work together to make these happen? So if you want to be part of those efforts, if you want to be part of that planning team, be on the list to be contacted when those start to happen in your area. Make sure you let us know that as well. You can do name and email is best. If you're not an email person, you want to do phone, you can do that. Either one will work. So before I take questions on the big plan, any questions on what we're looking for in terms of the breakout exercise? No questions. Okay. Any questions on the overall presentation?
Yes, sir. Could you go back to your slide that shows the 1440 per acre to the 5,000 per acre? What time, if in a perfect world, based on this plan, what time frame are you expecting to go from 1440 an acre to fiscally sustainable to 5,000 acre? What should we expect?
We were asked this question by staff. We get asked this a lot. There's a lot of variables that go in here. What I would say that the fastest way to close your gap is you build nothing but infill. And so no new development, do nothing but you put more development, more homes, more businesses in existing neighborhoods, vacant lots, or adding to, right? So you're not adding any more infrastructure, but you're adding more tax base. That's the fastest way to close your gap, and you generate more revenue without touching the tax rate, right? You're just building something different. The more new development you build, you're adding infrastructure, so you're adding cost to that equation, which is gonna make it take longer to ultimately close the gap. What really drives this though is, oops, I went the wrong way. How closely council sticks to this, right? If new development can be good, one of the things from a neighborhood and housing perspective is you have a couple of types of housing, and especially for single family, you don't have a lot of the higher price points. So anything new in the remaining land that you have left has got to provide different options. It could be high value rural estates. It could be higher value kind of mixed use suburban neighborhoods that have single family and duplex and cottages all mixed together. But you really, council and staff and the community need to be aware of anything new. If it's adding cost to the equation, you at least need to know that. Some development's gonna be negative, but because it just is, and that's fine. You just have to know where that gap is. But there's too many variables here. How much goes into infill? If you say the next 20,000 people that move to Killeen, how are you gonna split that between putting them into existing homes or existing units versus building new? I guess another part of that is, I didn't talk about this earlier, but when we look at the way that the city has grown, because your population growth, you are adding people, but you're not keeping up enough. What's happened is you're building so much new development in the south part of Killeen that it's kind of sabotaged your North Killeen. You're pulling the commercial demand from the north to the south, right? But the city still has to serve the north. You still have police and fire and streets and everything else that has. So the fastest way, we have this in the plan, the fastest way to close the gap is get as much redevelopment and infill in North Killeen as you possibly can. Anything that happens new has to have a fiscal analysis done and know how is it gonna, is it gonna give us a revenue bump? Is it gonna add some different price points, maybe some $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 homes? There are people in Killeen that want those and they've had to go somewhere else. Can we get some better quality duplexes? I mean, I've seen duplexes in some other communities that people are paying $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 for a duplex. If it's in a good neighborhood and it's designed well, you can get some high price points there. You can also get a lot more of the affordable options at better quality, as well. So there's too many variables, back to your question, there's too many variables to say we're gonna do this. It's gonna take you longer than 20 years to ultimately get there. You're too far behind.
So your ordinancing then has to be tied to value of development.
Yes, sir.
So you're advocating that if an individual comes in now and owns a piece of property and says, well, I want to build a duplex on this property, they go in and get permitting, the city will basically say, well, unless it generates this much revenue, you can't put that type of business there or that type of building there?
Not quite that specific, but a couple of things we talked about is building the fiscal impact tool. So as a development comes in, you can see what's the taxable value that you're going to build, that the city's going to capture revenue from. What are the costs that we're going to take on in terms of the cost per household or per unit or whatever, the infrastructure costs, street costs that we're taking on, and then there's a net number there of like it's going to bring in this much revenue, that's going to add this much in cost and liabilities. Does it pay? First off, does the development pay for itself? Yes or no? And then if it provides a bump, how much? Or if it doesn't, what's that loss? It's just another data point. It can't be, you don't want it to be the end all be all of a decision, right? But what you're trying to do is get that diversity of quality of types of housing. It's something that we've seen developments in the last 6 months that have come in that, in my mind, followed the intent of the plan and got turned down for different reasons, in North Killeen especially. And then we've seen some other ones that are kind of getting through the process on new development that need a little more scrutiny in terms of not just the fiscal point, but also the design standards. So I didn't put it in here. Yeah, the plan has kind of the top 6 projects, but one of the big things that's coming out of this is an update to the city's code and design standards. So I just very blunt and to the point, the quality of design and construction in Killeen has got to be raised. The quality of construction over the last 20, 30 years has not been that great. And the quality of design is very cookie cutter generic that's not getting that neighborhood feel. Things like pocket parks and sidewalks and connectivity that matter, that create those neighborhoods where different ages can get around. We've got to build more of those in what's left, and then how can you retrofit some of the neighborhoods that you have to add some of that in. You do all of those together, but really the growth management is so important. Focus, even to the point of, we're going to have conversations with staff and council about how can you incentivize growth to the north? What can you do to convince and support developers to invest in businesses, to invest and reinvest in North Killeen? Because there's a ton, you guys might see it and not see it, there's a ton of potential in North Killeen to build the kind of neighborhoods that people are just itching to get to, whether it's coming north from Austin or coming south from Dallas.
Waive impact fees.
I think
Yes,
that's,
sir.
that's always going to be the challenge, because we built that, and let's say it plays out, and what happens, as you mentioned, it just increases the prices, it increases the amount of people, and when you try to balance that, and you mentioned that, home affordability, and North Killeen is probably our most affordable area right now. And by all means, we want to do it, but when we start focusing on that and growing it, what is that going to do to the area? It just goes up because more and more people want to live there. We're seeing it now a little bit, all these older homes being built, all the lots that are vacant, they're being coughed up and being sold for more. So there's, it's like, where do you find the balance there? Because how much control do we have that, as council members over that? Because when it comes down, it's the bottom line of that individual person. And if they see that there's a profit to be made, even on low, we're seeing a lot of Section 8 houses being flipped because it's like there's a shortage of them. Why? Because they're making money. And then it's like, well, then there's a lot of people that call my office, we don't have anything for you, I'm sorry.
And that's a great point. The planning word for that is gentrification, right? If we invest in an area, we grow it too fast, the values go up too fast, and you price the folks out that live there, right? That's why this part, Monty Anderson and I do so many workshops together, because my part talks more about the city's fiscal health, right? And what you have to do to get everything to pencil out. Monty comes in and says, how can you build this in a way, basically this is with and for the locals. So you're going into these neighborhoods, and one of the recommendations is to do a small developer, they call it a boot camp, I call it a workshop, but partner with local folks and teach them how to build incrementally and build smaller. And the simple way to explain it is Monty will take a space and say, what can people afford? What can a resident afford, or what can a business afford? And he's going to shrink the size of that unit until it pencils out for him as a small builder. And everybody always asks him, every time I do a workshop with him, who in the heck would want to rent a 300 square foot apartment? Who in the heck would want to live in an 1,100 square foot home with 2 rental units in the back? And every single time they get bought, they get leased, there's such a pent up demand for it. Now what Monty will do, even in his little 300 square foot little tiny spots, quality matters to him. He is very intentional with what he picks out in doorknobs. window framing, doors. I mean, even if it's small, it's high quality. But the key is he downsizes to fit the number people can pay. And when he does that, he squeezes more value out of the building as well. But the other part, what makes him different than so many other folks is he does it with and for the people that are living there. So if you got somebody that's living there right now and they want an accessory dwelling unit in the back, helping to get that financed and built. If you have somebody that is an entrepreneur that wants to start the business doing that kind of donut shop that I showed in Midtown, where there's the model where you have the building that has the business in the front and the residential in the back. So you can either live in the back and save money on rent and and use the revenue from the business to pay for the building and your own rent, or you can have the business in the front and you can rent out the unit in the back and use the rental income to help pay for the mortgage. But a lot of the key to gentrification, Monty uses the word gentrification, but it's really if we build enough of the different types of housing at the different spectrums of price points, you can keep the overall values from going up to ridiculous prices for the higher end stuff. But you can also by building it smaller, you can keep it a little more affordable as well. So that's a variable that's kind of been just designed out of what we're doing. I can't tell you how many of these we do, and people say, well, bigger lots are better, bigger homes are better. That brings more value to the city. Sometimes it also brings more cost to the city and more service area to the city. So there's a lot of analysis behind this, but that's a really important question that needs to be part of development decisions as well. You don't, like in North Killeen, I wouldn't allow anything over 3 stories. You don't, we call it put a lid on it. Not right now, but if you start to build the demand that he's talking about, some developer's going to come in and want to do something bigger. And if you put all that demand in one vertical building, you take demand away from a couple of other projects that could happen around. So you want to spread that wealth around the neighborhood and then incrementally bump it up.
So is that for houses or is that for businesses?
Both.
And that's another challenge, because I know part of North Killeen, one of the things I was saying is the reason that a lot of businesses are not so successful, because they don't have that foot traffic. It's always been boxed in. And so in order for us to grow that little coffee shop, because most of them, they're highway accessible. That's where most of your people are. So how many people are going to drive to North Killeen to support that business? It usually comes around for the people that live there. And when you're boxed in, you can't develop this way. You're pretty much left going that way to put more feet on the ground. So that you can bring that traffic that most of those businesses need out there.
What happens with some of these is the way you get that expansion is someone will come in and have their first building, and then as they do well, they grab the next building. And so you kind of expand your footprint through buildings and partnerships. Sometimes some of the first folks that came into Duncanville, which is where Monty started this, their businesses got going and they started to get some extra wealth. What they did is go in and support another entrepreneur that said, hey, for my coffee shop to do better, we need a bike shop or we need whatever. And so they go in kind of on that financing deal for that next business and kind of give back and cultivate it that way. So there are strategies here for it to happen. I know when we had some one-on-one conversations with a number of folks in Killeen, there's a lot of interest in taking this approach. This doesn't work everywhere, but in North Killeen, it's a critical part of it. And it's got to be the realtors, the bankers, your local contractors. It's got to be kind of a coordinated effort across the community to make that happen. And to get that coordinated effort, you need the broader community to understand the importance North Killeen has to the overall health of the city.
My logic in trying to tear down that bank and bring the tax annex, because people are forced to go down there. And while you're there, as you say, you find businesses that complement each other. And hey, I got to go down there. I got to wait 3 hours. Might as well hang out at a coffee shop or something. So what you said is kind of in line with what we're trying to do with that building.
My only thing there would be put the county, there's the other site that's the police department site that the city has. Put them there and save that bank building for something else.
Yeah. Don't worry, where that park you want, that's a
It wouldn't be
parking
a
lot.
church.
That's not gonna be a
Not
parking lot.
I can tell you, it'd be a church.
Well, you don't want that. You don't want that either.
All the county buildings and churches.
Any other questions?
Is the troop drawdown part of the equation? Because we're talking about reducing military forces.
The question is the troop drawdown part of the equation? So you have, when we did in the upfront part of the plan, we talk about the transient population of Killeen, right? You have folks that are in and out, not necessarily here for a long period of time. Part of that is the military. Part of that we heard from other folks is they're like, I'm not military, but Killeen hasn't built the kind of houses that I can evolve in and stay in Killeen over time. So you have leakage of people will live in Killeen for a little bit and then they move. That's all part of it, but the base and the military is a huge asset to the community. It's part of who Killeen is. But there's so many people moving to Texas.
Well, it's just put on, the reason why is because the Pentagon has put Fort Hood as part of the drawdown in the next 5 years to have a reduction in forces here. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, it will affect population a little bit, but the goal is to try to attract and retain not just those folks, but the non-military folks, to Killeen as well. So again, like I said, your population growth has not been as fast as the footprint you've been building. We did unpack a little more in the plan about the vet exemptions as well. I know there's been a lot of conversations about that. The only thing I'll say with that one is, while they are definitely needed and very much deserved, the reality is that the amount of development in Killeen that has exemptions on it is growing at an insane amount, to the point that, and I think this was in the last budget conversation, but the amount of exemptions is more than the amount of additional property tax revenue for 3 years running in the city. So even with all of the new development you're building, the additional property tax revenue you're getting is less than the amount that your exemptions are growing. So is that absolutely a conversation down in Austin? Yes, but it's putting a lot of pressure on your city leaders to serve. I think Mr. Wilkerson had a quote that we grabbed and put in the plan, but you're serving the population of 150,000 with the tax revenue of, I believe he said, around 90,000. So, which just means everything else you're building has to be that much more productive so that you can embrace those folks. The other part of that is, if you go to most cities, you can't get a brand new single family home in a brand new neighborhood for the price that you get it in Killeen. And so some of it, my first 2 houses weren't new.
They base the prices off of the soldiers' BAH.
Yep. There's a lot there, and so how do you give folks different options for that? The reality is that is the price point that they have. So what are some options with that price point that they can do? And again, there's different people have different interests, and the goal is, how do we build a spectrum across Killeen that can keep those different types and interests in Killeen over time and do it affordably, both for the city and for the folks living here.
Bottom line, the market is going to determine what houses are worth anywhere. And some of the points you've made are to enhance the market, to make those properties more valuable. Without the enhancement, Killeen does not offer the same price point on the market for any home in Killeen comparative to a home just outside of Killeen. Homes, same square footage homes, very similar homes built to the same builders, build the same home in Killeen and same home in Harker Heights, which is happens that way, and they'll sell for 20% more in Harker Heights oftentimes than they do in Killeen.
I would be interested in seeing the neighborhood that home is in and comparing those. What are
It's a lot price.
Yeah,
It's the lot price.
it's a lot price. And they have their ordinancing is tougher.
Their building standards, so it's not the same house then.
so there's a lot of things that fit together, and I'll try to summarize this. Like, for average citizen, what comes down is, you guys deserve a good quality of life for what you can afford. your city is just not alone. They're like every other city out there, but they're challenged to provide those services and that quality of life with the resources that they have. And this whole plan is built with a number of strategies and ways to try to generate additional revenue, build some different affordable units so that you can have that quality of life that you want at a price point that you can afford without the property tax rate going through the roof. Okay, we'll go ahead and break. Let's get to tables. I'll get your question. We have 2 more questions or what? Let's get your question real quick.
The big apartment complex that's going in down here where W.S. Young runs into the thing, my understanding is half will be for low-income people,
Section
half
8.
for other people. Good concept on the surface, but in a lot of other cities, the gangs have moved into part of that. People have torn the plumbing and sold the stuff. Is there a plan there needs to be a plan for some kind of security and inspections of that area, or we're going to create another crime area?
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's a little bit beyond the scope of this, but it does, code enforcement is part of this. Something too that I will say though is really important is civic pride, right? We need to cultivate a culture of civic pride in Killeen. Like, people should look at their own building, their own property and say, I want to take care of this. When their neighbor's not, they hold them accountable. There's a lot of people need to hold each other accountable. Our parents need to hold our kids accountable. It's not all on the city to just solve everything, but a lot of times with things like that, where they get into trouble is you take a building or apartments or something like that, and it's where you put them and how you design it and how those folks feel. Do they feel like this is quality? Do they feel like people care? Do they feel like people respect me? And if the answer to those are yes, then they take care of things better. But if it's no, if you give them a crappy spot out in the middle of nowhere where nobody else wants to be, that's where all that kind of stuff happens. So it's all related, but I do appreciate the question. Okay, guys, so please take some time, go to your one zone, give us some comments. If you have them, we'll be around to answer some questions for a little while, and then feel free once you've given us your feedback, you're free to head home for the night.